Well, I guess that's fairly familiar to you. Does anyone know where it's from? Sermon on the Mount? Pretty obvious, isn't it? The Bible reading, things we've read plenty of times before if we've gone to church, or if you haven't gone to church, maybe it's something you're hearing for the first time and you realise there's a lot of wisdom in it, a lot of wisdom. This morning I want to reflect on it. But first let me set the context of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus was speaking in the north of Israel at the time, in a place called Galilee. Jenny and I have been to the place that they believe Jesus spoke from. It's tradition, who knows? But there's plenty of places around where a lot of people could gather to hear him speak. Matthew says he was primarily teaching his disciples, and yet a crowd had gathered as well. So it's not just his disciples, there's a lot of curious people around the edges, most likely a mixture of farmers and of fishermen and of day labourers, that is, people who just get labour day by day as it turns up when they can get it. Galilee, along with the rest of Israel at this particular point in time, was under Roman rule. The Roman Empire stretched very vast, and it had taken over Israel and the area of Palestine at the time. Life for the average person was incredibly challenging. Roman rule was harsh. They didn't respect Jewish customs. They put a huge tax burden on people and forced many into hard labour, and brutally suppressed any revolts, and using crucifixion as one of the main deterrents. Sometimes they would line up hundreds of people on crosses to remind them just who was in charge. Society was hierarchical, very little social mobility. The Jewish rules meant that a number of people were considered unclean. That is, if you had skin disease, a leper, or menstruating women. There were a whole lot of set of rules that said who's in and who's out. In fact, a lot of women had very few rights and had to wait for permission to do so many things from their husbands or their fathers. Economic wealth was concentrated highly in the elites, which meant that debt was common, leading to land loss and sometimes slavery, sometimes for whole families. And religiously, these people up the north, who were the country hicks, much more than the city elites down in Jerusalem, they were oppressed not only by the Romans religiously, but by their own people. Emperor worship was expected, which was deeply offensive to the Jews. The Roman governors occasionally used the temple funds to fund their own projects. And 6 years after Jesus was born, Rome took complete control over the area, putting their own governor, which in the time of Jesus' death was Pontius Pilate, to try and keep things in order. The high priest, the Jewish high priest, and the aristocratic families often colluded with the Romans for a profit. They controlled the temple, which means they controlled the money changing, and did so at exorbitant cost. And if you needed to sacrifice an animal, which was part of the Jewish custom, then you had to buy an animal if you didn't have one. And they had exorbitant prices on them. So they were doing very well, thank you very much. That's why Jesus got angry and upturned the tables in the temple. The Jewish religious leaders put high expectations on their people that they could not fulfill, and hence they became unclean and were on the outside, not the inside. On the inside, many were oppressed by the trauma of the life that they were living. They showed signs which they called demon possession. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't call it the same today. But whatever way, they suffered deep trauma living under the oppression of the Romans. It's in that context that Jesus gets up and says, don't worry about your life. And I'm sure a lot of people are going, what are you talking about? You don't know what life's like. Well, Jesus would say, I do. I actually grew up in Galilee. I'm one of you. I know what it's like. But don't worry about your life. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And so here we see Jesus speaking wisdom to a people who are doing life tough. And I think, and I believe, that it's important for us today just as well in our lives, even though by comparison we're not really doing life tough that they had in terms of physical oppression, in terms of wondering where their next meal's coming from. But certainly in our society today there's a lot of stress, there is a lot of anxiousness, there is a lot of uncertainty, and people are fearful. Our fast-paced lifestyle gives people information overload. There is uncertainty about the future for people, where it's job insecurity. For some people, as Matt prayed, it is about getting enough money for heating of their homes. Maybe for some people it's food. There is political and economic instability. People are worried about climate change and what it means for the future of many people, in fact, the planet. People live often with the fear of missing out or the fear of not measuring up, fed by algorithms of social media. And there's a lot of loneliness and a lot of mental illness and a lot of disconnection in our society today. I wonder if Jesus would say the same thing to them. Don't worry about your life. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. And I think there's a lot of people, if we would hear Jesus saying, you don't know my life. You don't know what's going on. So what does Jesus say in response to that? This morning I want to talk about 3 things. And I need my clicker, Jenny. Can you get it there? So poor Ryan doesn't need to do it. And it's working. So don't worry about your life. Jesus talks a little bit about this, and I want to talk a bit about it. First, I want to talk about 3 things. I want to talk about behold, believe, and become. 3 words. Behold, believe, become. So, behold my new grandson, Gray Toby Peters, born on June the 3rd. Behold, what do I mean? What does it mean when I say behold? I just don't mean look or just see. Behold has something a bit richer, a bit deeper in it. The be in behold makes it something special. Hold has got the idea of something you grasp, something that you want, something you go after. But behold means stepping back a little bit and pondering. It's not just seeing with the eyes, it's seeing with the heart, with the emotions. And it's interesting in the King James version of our reading, it says, behold the fowls of the air. Some of you might remember reading that in ancient days. Behold the fowls of the air. To people doing it tough, worrying about how to survive, what about tomorrow, Jesus says, behold, look, consider. Behold a newborn baby. Behold the birds. Behold the flowers. Behold the stars in the air, the images that we get from the Webb telescope. Behold a parent or a friend or a grandparent. Behold the world. Take a moment to stop grabbing, to stop worrying, to stop seizing, to stop owning, to stop trying to control. Behold implies something of wonder and awe. To stop. Jesus says, behold. It's not a command, I don't think. I think it's an invitation. An invitation when you're doing life tough. Behold the birds of the air. They do not reap. They do not sow. Yet your Father, Heavenly Father feeds them. Think on that and reflect about that. See how the flowers of the field grow. They don't labour or spin. Yet I tell you that even Solomon, in all his splendour, was not dressed like one of these. Jesus is inviting the people doing it tough in Galilee, oppressed by Rome, oppressed by their own religious leaders, to stop and look at the world around them, to reflect on it, to see the world through a different set of eyes, to see it for God's abundance, for God's generosity, for God's care, and for God's grace. I'm sure it must have been difficult for the people of Jesus' day to do that. When they looked around, they would have seen the Roman garrisons oppressing the people. They would have seen their religious elites parading their wealth and showing off how good they are. They would have looked at their own homes and wondered, where's the food coming tomorrow? And Jesus says, no, don't look at that. Look at something else about the world and about the created order around. Look again. See past all that stuff and see how the birds of the air flourish. See how the flowers go. And doesn't God love and care for you more than them? So Jesus points them to the world around them to say, behold, look at that. I've said it a couple of times here recently, but so it must be important for me. And that is, in the new house that Jenny and I are living in, just in the winter, we didn't expect it, that the sun shines through on a morning. These mornings when the sun is shining, we sit at our little table and the sun shines on us through the window. It's just the right angle at 8 o'clock in the morning. And every time I feel the warmth of the sun, I choose to behold the wonder that the sun has risen again today, that the sun continues to shine, that I feel warm, that's growing the flowers, that's growing the plants, that's making this world so fertile and flourishing. Behold the world around us. Why does Jesus say, behold? Because he wants them to believe. Hence my second word. Leave is not a word that we use today in believe. But I did a little bit of work on it. Where does it come from? Where would believe come from? And you know what? When you go way back far enough, it comes from love. It comes from love. It says, be love. Not romantic love, but a sense of cherishing. Something you hold dear. Later, it changes its meaning a little bit to trust, that you trust in those that you cherish. So it's got this little area of trust, and then only recently has it come to be the idea of I accept as true, believe. But the root of it is in love. So we see the development from love to cherish to accept. We often associate with believe with an intellectual yes, but it's also something deeply emotional. Our deepest beliefs stem from what we love and what we cherish. It's not surprising then that when I say, I believe you ever said that to someone? Or has someone said to you, I believe you? It's emotionally charged. It's just not in your brain. It hits you in your heart. Deep down, I believe you. It's emotionally loaded. We're not just affirming fact, we're talking about relationship and cherishing relationship, of trust. And I'm actually opening myself to the other person when I say, I believe you. So Jesus calls this group of Galilean, poor farmers and fishermen, daily labourers who haven't got a lot of money in the bank, who are worried about how they're going to eat tomorrow. He says, I encourage you to behold, to look around you at the world you live in and believe that the God behind it loves you. That the God behind it cares for you. That this world is a place that flourishes because God is there. In his autobiography, The Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, has anyone had a chance to read it? It's a wonderful read. It's a big read, but it's a good read. He speaks of his 27 years in prison in South Africa. And despite the harsh treatment, he pursues a journey of self-education, reading widely and discussing political theory and practice with other prisoners. His constant focus was to behold, to look forward to envisage a free, democratic, non-racially segregated South Africa. And by considering it, and pondering it, his autobiography talks about his transformation where he came to believe that it could be possible, despite the fact that he was in jail. By considering it, by pondering it, he began to believe that it was possible. You can look at many, many examples through history of people who pondered on something, who beheld it long enough that it changed them to believe that it was possible. Jenny and I not long ago watched a film on Marie Curie, and her journey of trying to understand radioactivity. It's amazing that even her notebooks now you can only read with suits on to protect you from the radioactivity, because even her notebooks have got so much radioactivity in them they're considered dangerous today. But her singular focus, her dedicated to that life, led to ground-breaking discoveries. When life is tough, we have a choice. We can choose to behold the world around us, and it will enable us to take a journey to believe things, and you know what? Amazing things can become to happen. But I'm moving on to the next one, to become. Let's stop with believe. When you look at the world around you at the moment, what do you see? There is a lot of fear, as I said. There's a lot of sense of scarcity, of competition, of despondency. However, when you take a second look, when you look at the birds, can you believe in a God of abundance, not a God of scarcity? When you behold the flowers, can you believe in a God of generosity and not meanness? And when you consider the magnificence of the stars, can you believe in a God of hope, not a God of despair? See, Jesus says, behold the world around you. Sacred Tasmania. We live in a beautiful place in the world that enables us to do just that, to behold the world around us, that takes us to a place where we can believe that God cares and that the world is in fact good. So let's become. Jesus says in the beginning of our Bible reading, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, that is, what you treasure, what you believe, there your heart will be. And when Jesus uses the word heart, he's talking about emotions, he's talking about thoughts, he's talking about intentions, he's talking about that part of your life where decisions are made, where true character resides. And Jesus is saying, what you treasure, what you behold, what you believe, changes you. It changes your heart. That's where your heart will become like what you treasure. So if you treasure and you ponder and you think about scarcity and fear and despondency and depression, guess what will happen with your life? Those things you will see everywhere. Has anyone bought a red car, and then once you've got a red car, you see every other red car on the road? It's just like that, isn't it? We notice those things when we start to decide to notice. Well, it's a fact of life. Where your treasure is, your thoughts, emotions, and decisions will follow. What you treasure is what you become. That's the progression that we're talking about here. And this is the profound wisdom of Jesus. In a harsh, difficult world, he has a word to say to people that live in this world and says, just look at the world around you. Now it's interesting, Nelson Mandela's autobiography goes on a bit further. He reveals how his reflection not only caused him to believe and hope in a new South Africa, he talks about how it transformed him from being an angry young revolutionary into a statesman. And we noted that, a man of remarkable forgiveness and unity. Sadly, people who followed him couldn't copy him. Upon his release, he embodied the reconciliation that he so long envisaged. To behold is to believe, is to become. I could talk about a lot more. I could talk about Helen Keller, who after losing her sight initially was shattered only to become a person fascinated with communication, that she went from an isolated child to a world-renowned author, lecturer and advocate for disabilities. Going through a few other examples, I was thinking of Les Mis by Victor Hugo of Jean Valjean, and his journey from being a bitter, desperate, mistrusting man who received some kindness and mercy of a bishop, but by reflecting on what that bishop had done, chose to believe that he could become like it. And he does become a person who dedicates his life to others, from an embittered ex-convict to a compassionate, selfless man. I could go on about examples time and time again. So let me wrap this up. Jesus ends our reading with another bit of great wisdom, a second invitation. He says, I'll skip a little bit, put it in context. Do not worry, your heavenly Father knows what you need. So seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. I believe it's an invitation. I think it's really important to see it the way I sort of grew up believing that this was saying, if you do things God's way, seek God's kingdom, then you'll be seen by God as a good boy, Stephen, and God will give you what you deserve for being a good boy. Has anyone ever thought of it like that too? Am I just the only one? Well, I think Jesus is saying no in the context. Behold the world as it lives. The way the world operates, the way you live in the world. And so therefore, if you do things God's way, if you seek God's kingdom, God's way of doing things, you know what? Things will come together. Don't fight it. Don't fight the world we live in. See how the birds of the air live. See how the flowers go. He's saying if you live according to the way God has made things, it works. It works. If you look closely and ponder sincerely, you will see God's power at work in the universe. That's what Paul says in Romans 1. You will see God's generosity and grace and abundance. Sometimes I think we live in a fishbowl. Consider a fish, swimming in the water, unaware of the water itself. Can't blame it. It's just life in the fishbowl. And we can be the same. We can live in this world worrying about the cares of each day, worrying about a whole lot of stuff, and we just don't know where we are. If the fish stopped and pondered, you'd say, thank the Creator that I've got water to live in, because if the water wasn't here, I'd be dead. Probably got a very small brain, so I'm not sure it ponders that question like you and I might. But you see what Jesus is saying? So you live in a fishbowl of abundance and generosity every day. Just look out and behold it. Just see it. God supplies your need. The air you're breathing, God gave you. The fact that you've got enough energy for your heart to pump blood around your body says that God is looking after you. There is so much to behold around us, so much to see, so much to believe in by looking around us. Paul, reflecting on Jesus, summed it up pretty simply this way. In Galatians, he says, you reap what you sow. Same idea, isn't it? Same idea. You reap what you sow. And no wonder in Philippians, Paul reflects and says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Pretty straightforward. This is the way the world works. Jesus calls us to sit back and to behold. The goodness of God is all around us, every moment of every day. Have we got the eyes to see it? We live in this wonderful place called Tasmania, Sacred Tasmania. It's sacred because every day, every moment, it's declaring the glory of God. The question is, will we behold it? Let me pray. Jesus, thank you for your wisdom. Thank you that we still have that wisdom because it was written down, inspired by your Spirit still to today. And I thank you what you said to those Galilean peasants all those years ago on those hills near the Sea of Galilee are just as relevant to us today as they were then. Would you help us to be people who behold, who don't worry, who don't fret about our life, but look around us and see the abundance, to see the generosity, to see your grace, and that we will believe that you care for us, and we will ultimately become the people you want us to be, and also we will become part of the goodness of this world for those around us. We pray these things in your name. Amen.
Thanks, Stephen. I really like that formulation, behold, believe, become.
Yep.
A great way to think about it. It actually reminded me of Psalm 8 as you were preaching.
Okay, yeah.
When I consider the heavens, the work of your hands,
yep.
What's man that you're mindful of him?
Exactly.
And then finishes at the point that actually you do care for us.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful picture,
theme.
isn't it?
Yeah, the same theme. Yeah.
A few questions for you today. How literally do we take do not worry about tomorrow? If we focused only on today, can that not make things harder in the future? There's got to be some forethought, I guess, is what the questioner is asking.
Yeah.
Is today not harder than it might have been if we'd thought about it yesterday?
That's a good question. Well, I think there's no doubt that we can plan for tomorrow without worrying about it. And I think that's what Jesus is wanting to make a distinction. And so, Jenny and I have spoken to our financial advisor about the fact that I'm finishing up here. Now we're planning for it. Choose not to worry about it because God is good. There's a difference between preparation and worry, I think.
Important distinction. A lot about what you spoke about had that sense of lifting our eyes, perceiving, understanding perhaps the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. Is that the distinction between hope and hopelessness for us as people?
Well, I think it can be. I think that's what Jesus is saying, is that where you look and what you choose to look at and what to dwell on, hence Paul's point about whatever is good, whatever is lovely, that changes your disposition and the way you sit in the world and what you feel about hope and about the future. Absolutely. I think, it's an interesting, isn't it? Because certainly I was taught you will find all the sustenance you need by reading the Bible. And I'm not saying the Bible's not good. I read it every day. It's really important. But actually, Jesus is saying, not just saying that, saying there is other things that are helpful for you to live hopefully in this world. And one of them is the world itself. I think our society at the moment is looking in at itself, trying to find that, where it's all about what's going on inside me and all the rest of it. And I think, putting your eyes up, getting away from you, not down in the Bible, but looking up is another way of engaging and hopefully bringing hope. And I think it's important in our day and age because people have lost confidence in written words. But the world is there. Like the sun comes up again tomorrow, it's there. So it speaks. So let's direct people to that. And I think if we see with the eyes that Jesus is asking us to behold, it brings hope. Brings hope. Yeah.
Something incredibly powerful about being other-focused as well, isn't there, when we look beyond ourselves?
Oh, yes. Well, looking in at ourselves, warts and all. I'm not saying that the reflective journey is not an important part of it, but if it's done without the reference to the goodness of God, then I get to despair pretty quickly because, as Paul would say, I don't do the things I want to do. Yeah. So, yes, we can easily get to that place of either selfishness or greed or narcissism or just depression and despondency.
Absolutely. We sang, to follow on from that thought, all my life you have been faithful. Yeah. What if we feel as though there are times in our lives when we haven't felt that closeness of God, we felt we've been perhaps left and not loved? How do we consider that? What frame of reference do we apply to those moments?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, that's probably why I think what even Jesus is saying here to That's why the context of who Jesus was speaking to is important. They were doing life tough. And so, yeah, a lot of them would have thought that God is not looking after them. The Romans are here, so how can God allow that to happen? I think there's a deep mystery in all this that we're still, as human beings, grappling with, is how we understand the whole thing of how suffering is part of this world, and how times where life is really tough, how does that all figure with a compassionate, loving God? I think that is a paradox that we all grapple with in some shape or form, and our community grapples with. I haven't got time to talk about it all now, and we have talked about it here at a lot of different times, but that in that spot, I think that's why I love what Jesus is saying here. When people are in that spot, God, you're not here with me. I don't feel you close, or everything's falling apart. He says, wake up and look at the sunrise and remind yourself, God brought the sun up again. He's sustaining this universe somehow. I recognise that. And then deliberately looking for all the things that you can see in life. The fact that you can actually think about the fact that you're despairing is the fact that you're thinking is a positive way of thinking about it. So I think there is a way to do that, and for us as brothers and sisters to get alongside others and remind them of those things. Often it's really difficult to do yourself, so you need to be reminded with someone else and draw strength from someone else doing that for you.
Yeah.
I think.
So it's not so much about being a Pollyanna, is it, for those who are familiar with the movie, that sense that, that unending positivity.
Well, the interesting thing is that Jesus is just basically saying take one day at a time. Mm-hmm. So it's not all rosy. It's saying, I'll give you a way to enable you to get through this day.
Yeah.
And once you get through this day, then we'll worry about tomorrow. So it's not everything is rosy. It's saying, despite everything that's going on, I'm trusting in a good God.
Mm. And I think you've just answered this question, but going from that Pollyanna sort of sense, is it wrong to worry? I guess is the question. What does Jesus mean by that?
Yeah. I think it's probably something in this area. Where you are concerned about the future and make plans for it, there's nothing wrong with that. But where you get to the point where it's despairing and saying that there is no love, there is no care, there is no generosity, there is no God in the world, and you get to despair, then that's worry and that's fear and then that's anxiety. So, so I think it's probably in our heart, probably in that space. Jenny's about to go to Spain for 4 weeks. I could be fearful about that. Am I concerned about it? Yeah, I don't like the idea of living without Jenny for 4 weeks. Do I make plans of how I'm going to survive or thrive, as the case may be? Yes, I'm making lots of plans, but I don't choose to worry about it. I choose to believe that there will be enough, and I will be enough each day as each day comes to do well that day and trust God. So I've even had to going through this sermon, work on my own self-talk, rather than thinking, I've got to survive the next 4 weeks without Jenny. You heard me say, no, I need to say I'm going to thrive because God will be with me in it. And even I'm checking myself, saying, no, this is a good universe. This is a good day, even without Jenny. How about that?
Last question. We've beheld, we've believed, we're becoming is probably a good way to describe that third step, isn't it? Yep. There's that transformative effect.
Yes. It's ongoing. Yep.
And we're now seeing the world as God understands it and sees it. When are the right moments for us to be flipping the tables?
Yep. What do you mean by that?
Jesus went into the temple.
Flipping the tables. Flipping the tables.
Sorry, a little bit more explanation.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. I think that, there obviously is times to do it. That Jesus gives us an expectation of that. I think the thing that I want to learn from Jesus is, he spent 3 years of ministry. He was God incarnate and did it once. So therefore, if I think that's permission to get angry every time that something's not going right, I've actually taken the wrong example of it. But it does help us to say there are times to stand up and say, this is not right. There are times to do that. And you trust that you're walking enough in beholding, believing, becoming, that you actually know the right moment when you're doing it. It's not coming from your anger, it's a righteous anger from God, and that you're in tune with God in this moment. That would be my expectation. No, I think a lot of the protests that are happening in our world today, while I understand some of the sentiment of it, because there are things that are worth saying this is wrong. What gets sad about that is sometimes the way in which they demonstrate that it's wrong is actually part of the problem. And that, we need the wisdom of God in that.
Thank you, Stephen. I really love that formulation you used at the end of the present continuous, beholding, believing, becoming. It's continuous, isn't it? It's a process for us. Thanks for your time this morning and those insights.